Hello everyone and welcome to the Monaco Streaming Film Festival's Masterclass series. Today we're going to be talking about international fast distribution with Vevo. I'm your host Gavin Bridge and we're joined here with Rob Christensen, who's the SVP of US Sales and Global Distribution at Vevo. That's a really interesting title, Rob. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to do it. Thanks again for having me. Look forward to the discussion. So really, it's been a 4-year effort here and we're really gaining steam, I would say, globally right now. But basically what that entails is my purview. I've been in charge of our connected TV revenue globally. But the revenue and the impressions aren't possible without increased distribution in television. So working hard with our biz dev team to identify platforms and partners for us to increase our distribution globally, specifically within the fast linear landscape, to complement what we already have in market with free ad-supported streaming options like VOD on YouTube or VOD inside of our own Vevo TV applications. So we have grown that offering in the US, expanded into Europe, UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Netherlands specifically as of to date. We're looking to expand further in Canada, Latin America, and have a presence currently Australia, New Zealand as well. So I have been working hard at the revenue piece, but also managing our distribution partnerships globally, which a number of things go into that, to name a few: ensuring that our channels and content are discoverable, that they're being promoted, working with platforms and distribution partners to understand more about their platforms individually, their audiences. We can no longer assume that every audience and platform is the same. So with over 700,000 pieces of content in our library, as a joint venture, by the way, of Universal Music and Sony Music, we have a plethora of content for us to pick and choose from to program in a linear fashion as tastemakers to in a way that most resonates with the users and audience of specific platforms. So that's a lot of stuff I just mentioned, but happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Sure. I mean, Vevo is a brand I think people have likely seen, even if they're not familiar with the name, right? Because if you're effectively watching a music video from one of the labels you mentioned, that's being powered by Vevo. If you're seeing it on YouTube, or I mean, are there linear TV channels as well in some services?
Traditional linear, not, and when I say traditional, in the sense that we've been used to via, a broadcast or a cable operation. For us, the foray has really been specific with fast. We have about 150 fast channels globally now, with 22 of those currently in Europe. We do plan on doubling that number this year. We have some great imminent launches that are coming, more to come. Check out the press here in the next few months or so, but that's really been it for us. We were born on YouTube, like you said, 2009, so quite some time ago. We've had a great runway to understand usage of our content, just the amount of fandom that occurs when people discover artists, what other types of artists and music that they also like to watch visually, and we've been able to use that to inform how we've entered linear. So our own app, if you look up our Vevo TV app, used to be just VOD focused. And we've noticed that the behaviors on TV have been so different from that on mobile and desktop. We've decided to flip that strategy on its head and lead with linear inside of our app and have a VOD component that backs that up, as opposed to featuring VOD from the start. So it's been a lot of work to rebuild that product, but the reception has been fantastic and the viewership has been really solid.
So, I mean, anyone who's listening and is like fast, free ad-supported streaming TV, they're basically TV channels that are streamed and are free rather than via a traditional means. It's specifically interesting for Vevo, I think, because you think cable was built off of music channels, right? And even when I was growing up in the UK, there were more and more of these music video channels launching. Then the space kind of moved away, but the appetite never went anywhere, right? Like the appetite for the content never diminished. So like in the US, I know Vevo is can't remember off the top of my head how many channels, but I do know from my analysis that Vevo has the most music channels on Fast. So I'm assuming that is literally your plan for the world to sort of have the most channels in every major region.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our mission right now is really simple. As a company, the mission is to maximize the commercial and promotional value of the music video. When we talk to the sales team internally, it's our responsibility, and it's a great one to carry that. We're building a modern day global music television network, and there's a bunch of different things that allow us to do that. First of all, our content is free to air. It was born in the living room, to your point, had a massive effect on pop culture and television, cable television, but was always advertising supported. So there's a bit of this, frankly, that has us not needing to even reinvent the wheel. What does allow us now to reinvent this in a way is the technology that's available to us. The technology like IP linear delivery creates a true borderless and global opportunity for us, which is very, very unique. While I am focused on currently launching fast and linear in the countries that I mentioned, we're live from a VOD basis in 55 countries throughout the world. And so I feel like our job isn't done until we get fast linear exposure throughout as much of the globe as we can. So it's been interesting for us, because what we've seen starting in the US and beginning to bleed into other countries throughout the world is that there's a whole demographic, let's call it 18 to 24, 18 to 34-year-olds, that are discovering traditional television for the first time when they buy a new television set, they hang it on their wall, and they turn it on, and there's a electronic programming guide or an EPG right in front of their face with some of the greatest content that exists in their country. So we need to be in those neighborhoods. We have to be in the neighborhoods where users frequent, where they're discovering content, and increasingly so year over year, the more new television sets are sold, that is how content's being discovered.
So I guess the need to sort of be in more markets, is that one of the things that led to you going from what would have been an on-demand, mostly user-defined music discovery system, which would have been, say, on AVOD, and then a more curated channel-based system for FAST? What, I guess, as well as that need state, what was the impetus for you guys to be like, oh wow, we need to? When did you guys be like, we should take notice of this and let's get involved?
Yeah, it's a great question. Mainly, it's been an interesting path. So I'm in Vevo a little over 4 years now, and from when Vevo was born, as I mentioned earlier, on YouTube, at that time I was at Hulu in the US, and all video streaming was on desktop, right? That's how we sort of started online video, was in that capacity. And then we saw it shift from desktop to mobile. And that was certainly the case at Vevo via our YouTube relationship, our YouTube partnership. And I would say about 4 to 5 years ago, we started to see a trickle effect that moved mobile desktop viewership back towards, let's say, YouTube's connected television app, with users watching our content. And we started seeing that move in. And then, it was a little bit of a play on words, like, hey, let's return music television back to the living room. And that pattern really just started to shift super quick. Around the same time, like I mentioned, some of our global partners, like a Samsung TV Plus, for example, Roku, the Roku channel, some others, were launching these fast platform services globally. And, we're also in the market for content partners. And so it really was this moment in time that we said, let's follow the viewership, let's follow the opportunity. And with that, the global piece, do initial deals with partners that have a global footprint, unlike cable in the US or, operators in different countries, which are so regionalized that prohibit you to specific areas of a country. So that was the first foray within, let's call it 2019. And I think we could all agree that during the pandemic, just streaming and how people watch video in general, those behaviors changed and accelerated. And at this point, I think we know there's no looking back in terms of how content's being viewed and consumed.
Well, I do. You triggered something, and I do want to mention that when I was presenting at the TV of Tomorrow show last year with your colleague Bethany, and I had a slide up there to be nice to her, which was showed that the interest or consumption that we'd measured in a survey I did with Maru for music video channels was strongest among 18 to 34s, even on fast, which I think is really interesting because it does show that audiences are following those brands, and it's kind of like chicken and the egg. But I feel like the more brands that you recognize as especially as younger consumers, the more legitimate it becomes as a viewing force, right?
Yeah.
So,
especially amongst the demographic. What a lot of times I try to draw parallels to how television shows are shot and how they resonate with specific audiences. I look at the star, like the artists, as the stars of our shows, and the videos are the show, and they have an incredible production value. Most would average $1 million a minute, and if you compare that to something like Game of Thrones or whatever it might be, it's the production value is truly on par, and it works
if
so
not
well.
higher, really, because I think I was looking at numbers yesterday, and some fairly big name ones are only 15 million an episode, and you're like, whoa, that's actually a lot. So if you're averaging $1 million a minute, then you are probably at a higher level.
It's incredibly high level, and these are mini films, right? So we have this opportunity to curate the content based on platforms' interests, and a lot of times the fans, whether they're 18 to 24, 18 to 34, are discovering these artists for the first time. And sometimes what we really lean into at Vevo is when we have big opportunities like video world premieres. So let's say a new album is released, and there's a ton of fans that, there's tens of millions of fans literally that are following a certain artist. When a world premiere is released, we can get anywhere from, tens of millions of views within a 24-hour period. So we just remind our clients about, from an advertising perspective, no matter the country, there is a real opportunity to deliver a lot of impressions, a lot of rating points quickly because of the impact and cultural moments that new video releases have. And lastly, what that does is it helps the rest of that artist or artists like that artist libraries rise. The recommendation engines are strong, or the way we program would bring those to the forefront, and really increase the popularity of the full library as a result.
So I was going to ask you a question about curation, but you talking about the artist, maybe you wonder, have you ever done like an artist takeover of a channel where they select the videos for maybe an hour or two?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've done that a lot via OnDemand Takeovers. We are looking to incorporate that strategy into linear as well. So more of a holistic opportunity. I think both the viewer would gain from that, as well as advertisers. We want to basically look at Vevo and say, we want to represent Vevo on a TV screen. So make sure that the viewer behaviors or the way that videos get released or the way that ads get bought are reflected across all Vevo on a TV screen, no matter how it gets there, whether it's fast, VOD, our app. And we've made strides there. I think we have to make more strides on a weekly basis, becoming programmed like a day, date, time specific network that announces when specific premieres are going to be released at what time, and build that behavior. I think there's likely a behavior in fast from a viewership perspective that still needs to get adopted as that type of thing being more normal, as compared to traditional TV, where that's the only way that you would expect a network to be programmed.
Yeah, it's an interesting trend that's happening in two ways. So there are some channels now that are programming on day part, which within fast, which would have been unheard of even a year ago. But equally, trusted media brands had a show that came out last month that they announced, and it would have a new episode on one of their channels every Friday at 10 p.m. So you are beginning to sort of see that time slot release. Plus there's some other ones that kind of cut to life sometimes that, because I know Fast has built the capacity up to do that now. So it sounds like we'll find some interesting innovations on Vevo. I look forward to sort of having the Gavin take over one day when I get really big. Yeah,
well that'll be, in MIP, maybe we can have a little rosé and talk about the Gavin takeover. That'd be amazing.
Honestly, if you say rosé, I'm there. So I want to move. Well, actually, one last question on the channels before we move to sort of just talk a little bit about Europe. Do you? So, two-part question. Do you have any originals at the moment? And two, are the channels fully curated by people, or is there sort of like a playlist sometimes? Like how do the channels get programmed?
Yeah, they get programmed by our experts inside of our content and programming group. So human curation, we are the ones that bring, not me, but the people that are actually really good at that at Vevo are the ones that bring the content forward in our channels. It's updated by default on a weekly basis, could certainly be updated more often than that if needed for any cultural moments, any programming needs throughout the week. And we have originals historically. We have originals that focus on new artists being found. One that we do produce is called Discover. We are entering more into a cadence of original live performances that really are artistic, cool performances that we shoot with artists that will feature, a certain number of songs. Our viewers and clients do love that. And honestly, with our new front period in the US approaching here in May, we will have more to announce then when it comes to originals. But it's a big focus of ours moving forward to not just figure out how can we get brands involved with those types of executions, but how can we innovate and not just innovate, but how can we innovate and help our channels become more discoverable? Because it is a fragmented space. So we're fortunate to have great intellectual property that our partners really do feel excited about on a regular basis. So we can have Taylor Swift, for example, we can promote her new video on her behalf in a partner's masthead. That drives viewership, but that, we can't just rely on the cadence of those types of executions. So we have a new studio that we built, and our team is really focused on how do we evolve the overall programming offering.
It's a very interesting point, especially with the general trend towards more unscripted being produced and being sought after. So I would imagine you may end up in a year or two have people knocking on your door, but like, do you want to syndicate some of that to us, please? Because we need more stuff.
Absolutely.
So moving to talk about Europe for a little bit.
Yep.
You mentioned actually like the market being fragmented, and like in the US, partly because of the scale of the country, but we have tremendous a number of services, like 16 decently sized ones, I think, in terms of audience, versus European countries which are smaller in population, probably can't support as many. How have you found that the fast landscape looks in Europe versus sort of the mature market of the US?
Yeah, I see it frankly as progressing. I think it very much looks like what we've seen in other countries throughout the world. I think that at least from my perspective, where we've seen Vevo CTV viewership get to right now in Europe is where we probably saw it be about 2 years ago. So I think I don't want to automatically assume everything's 2 years behind. That's an irresponsible statement. But I think that the adoption of just in general fast has been at about that pace. And that's where I've really leaned into Europe right now to come up with the best ways for us to monetize the opportunity. There's been a lot of good signals recently. I can name a few. Maybe we'll talk about them in a bit. But companies like Channel 4 being willing to distribute some content to YouTube, which is effectively a fast environment, just not linear, right? Recent news on Barb about how was television defined. I think those are all really good progressions for us as a new age television offering to be able to move forward with more confidence and just expand not just distribution but also monetization opportunities and measurement.
It's a very good point. So I think that people in the industry, in particular, maybe some analysts, not me, I'm going to put myself outside of that box for a sec, but I think people can sometimes get a bit too hooked up on, or hung up on, is it streaming or is it TV? But if you look at most names of even the fast services here, they've all got TV or channels in the name for the most part, because it's it's the same mechanism. It's still on the screen. It's still ad supported. It's just it comes through the internet rather than a cable or an antenna, right? Like it's
and it also, though, I think in the early days of, I suppose still early days, by the way, but the earliest of days of FAST, the first sniff check, if you would, of the viewer as they scrolled through a guide would be that the content isn't necessarily, on the whole, literally the same content or of the same quality. So one of the things that I've seen, and I do anticipate to begin or continue in Europe, is that the long tail of a lot of those EPGs from the start have definitely been trimmed. I think the number of channels, most platforms are being really, really conscious on not just the number of channels, but the quality. And we're starting to see, I mentioned Channel 4 in YouTube in Europe, but in the US, some patterns of, Warner Brothers Discovery and network portfolios like that, really distributing fast channels onto effectively competing platforms like Tubi TV or, the Roku channel. So those are things I don't think that any of us, regardless of the country, could have conceptualized even a year or two ago. So to start seeing that now, it really begins to feel like fast has arrived. And if you are a new viewer that is checking out a Samsung TV Plus, for example, you're going to start to see a lot more familiar content, which I think right from the onset will legitimize those offerings as quality and familiar.
Yeah, the heavy hitters are really turning up now. And I think that it began when Pluto got acquired by Viacom, and then all of a sudden you had the MTV networks on FAST, and it really gave it that shot of legitimacy. Because thinking about what you said about when you look at the brand, maybe 5 years ago, it was like Bizarro World. Really, when you look like some weird version of television, you're like, it's like you went to the dollar store and got like there was like alternative versions of every network, but nothing you'd ever heard of. So
yeah, and in many cases you'll see channels that are dedicated to one show, like 24-hour channels that are dedicated to one show. So look, the real estate exists and the economics must be good in those cases. But the more, as you said, the more that the heavy hitters come to play, I would imagine that real estate gets more and more valuable. And that's what the corner we're trying to see around is that too. So tying back into your original question and how do we innovate, I think, we feel humbly like leaders in the space. We feel like we were in the fast space early and built out a really strong distribution network globally. But that doesn't mean that we're there to stay regardless. We have to continue to innovate because the space will get more crowded and is getting more competitive. And, at the end of the day, usually, I think maybe you'd agree, maybe you disagree, IP and the best content seems to win out. So that's truly where we're focused, is building moats at this point.
Yeah, you do see more music brands entering, but some only have audio rights, for instance, right, in the US particularly. So they can't offer the same stuff. I'm not 100% if I'm sure this is correct. I swear, when I looked at the recent WMX channels, I think it was, it was more like a lava lamp kind of screensaver sort of thing while music played, because they don't have the video rights, but they do have audio. But it is interesting to kind of see more and more companies entering into the music video space in FAST, which I guess shows you're onto a winner.
Well, I always try to say to our team, imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and not to say that they're imitating us per se. I don't want to make it sound like that, but look, it validates the space for us. There is room for competition. We think it's healthy. We feel that we are. Our two great starting points for us is we have a good runway when it comes to building out the fast distribution landscape ahead of time, and with adding in our viewership on YouTube, it gives us great scale when you combine all the different properties out there, specifically for the television screen. We follow that closely. We're aware of who else is out there, but in many cases, the offerings are complementary, and there's multiple news channels and there's multiple entertainment channels, and we feel that we just need to continue to innovate and do our best to differentiate our channels from others as much as possible.
Well, On that note, because you mentioned YouTube, made me think of something as a question. Is there any difference in how you monetize on a fast platform to a traditional, more AVOD-based platform, or is it the same? Because I believe it's advertising.
Yeah, it is average. So from an advertising perspective, there is not any difference. We have our direct ad sales team based in the UK and Europe. They focus on some international business, but mostly within UK. We have recently hired 2 partners to be a third-party sales partner for us throughout Europe. One is Rai in Italy. So Italian broadcaster Rai Pubblicità is our partner there that is monetizing for Vevo in Italy. We just had a great first experience with them, meaning this was the first year that we're working with them during the San Remo Festival. And Vevo's content and artists that were featured at the festival saw upwards of 175 to 180 million views in country during the actual festival. So really great start to the partnership there. And we work with a company called Web Ads, who's based out of Netherlands, that monetizes for us on the ground in France, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, and I think I got them all. So between direct ad sales, programmatic, indirect partnerships like Magnite and Freewheel, and our resellers on the ground, that's how we're focusing with ad sales. Of course, YouTube, Google are a great shared partner of us as well. So between our direct sales within the reservation-focused inventory bucket and YouTube's auction, we come through a well-rounded offering in the territories that we exist.
Speaking of territories, who are you partnering with around fast distribution in Europe?
So just to call out a few different partners, I mentioned Samsung TV Plus earlier. We are also live with Relax TV, Foxum. We just launched imminently with Freevee. So we have distribution with Sky, with Now TV, Plex, and those are, I think, round out the most of those right now. I think what you'll see shortly is that there are some partners we work with in the US that have a global footprint that will be expanding outside the US. So I'm not able to quite specify who that is yet, but we can circle back there. So that'll be exciting. And then just also, as I mentioned earlier, increasing the channels that we do have live, the fast channels that we have live on the services that I mentioned. Current day, we're at 22 fast channels in the EU, but we'll get to at least 44 by the end of the year, and that's a result of all the things I just mentioned.
So with the different countries that you're active in, I'm assuming you don't just say, right, maybe for like a country channel, it may be the same feed or the same playlist, but I'm assuming you have like local experts for each country, how you sort of curate the lists.
Yeah, exactly. So our first foray was just starting with Vevo Pop. We feel like that's the most popular bass genre for us to go ahead and program to. So an example of that is Vevo Pop in Italy is not the same feed as Vevo Pop in the UK. Different taste making, different artists, different popularity. So we do program on a localized basis for sure. In Germany, we have our Vevo Schlager Pop channel, which would not play quite well in any of the other countries, but does exceptionally well in Germany. So that's an example of level of customization and human touch that we could put into each channel that we do publish.
Then with the different, are there different opportunities in each country, or are there like general opportunities for fast within Europe?
I would say I don't want to minimize and say there aren't for each country. I think we're looking at partners that can help get us at the onset to as many places at once. So, we are working with, actually, Rise is a really good example. We don't have a partnership on this side yet, but they're an example of, they have a platform called RaiPlay that, we would love to work with them and figure out a way to distribute Vevo in that market. And we are going to continue to identify platforms like that for each individual markets. The onset has been us partnering with folks that have covered each of those territories, and we'll look to grow from there. One thing I didn't mention just real quick about programming is, because the real estate's pretty flexible in the sense that we can create pop-up channels throughout throughout the year as well. So one of the first ones that we've done, of course, is around holiday, which is a natural fit where that channel might live for, say, 45 days, give or take, within the holiday time period. And then we could either take that down or we can change that over into maybe, I'll use an example in the US, like Valentine's in February, or some other holiday-based events throughout the year that we feature, or different things that, that we really try to focus on celebrating. So that's a touch that we do activate on throughout the year, is not just the same channels and change the programming, but pop in new flavors of how we like to talk to the audience throughout the year as well.
I've always been a fan of pop-up channels, and it's nice to. I think they're a great innovation of like what TV could be, and sort of like how fast is changing the rules of television, but still within the same structure. So having sort of these themed versions, I'm imagining you could even have regional ones. Like an idea that popped into my head then was a Eurovision Song Contest one. Anyone who ever got a contract, you could actually do some like the best of the participants or something like that for Europe.
Yeah, we could put that. You could put that in, in the suggestion box. That's a good one. But all that stuff, what we said earlier, and just the theme here is what technology allows network and publishers to do that would have been nice to do forever. So it's really been fun playing and testing with that. Some things work well, some things you learn from. But you do have that ability to move fast, no pun intended. I feel like there's always a chance for a pun in these discussions, but to give us the best chance to move fast and, learn moving forward to put the best possible product out there.
Now, with Europe being, I guess, a sort of similar size for the major territories as the US, but each one having its own rules, are there any challenges or obstacles within sort of launching a fast operation in Europe versus what you would have been used to in the US?
Yeah. Some things are similar, some things are unique. I would just say, you already said, there's so many platforms already, and there aren't nearly as many as there are in the US, but there's still plenty. Each of them have their own data reporting capabilities, or what they're willing to report, and technological requirements, right? Those are all really big things at the jump, especially when you're trying to report to the labels at a video level for royalties and publishing and all that type of stuff. So that's makes it tougher on our legacy behaviors, because we have to become really nimble and flexible in order to launch across so many endpoints. And then for new channels, because of what we said, fragmentation, it's just adoption. Content is very, very important, and even if it's good enough, it's how do you cut through the noise? How do you, there's plenty of established competition, and our job is to build an audience out, right? So it gets hard. It's already been said, but in Europe, there are really, really strong free broadcast and entertainment options. So that's no secret. And that's both from a viewership and advertising market perspective. So having something exclusive or really special is important to stand out. And none of that's easy.
Yeah, I can imagine you need to have like independent people experts on the ground in every country, don't you? Versus that's where culturally, that's where we've arrived with local sales partners. We are doing our best to get, our experts internally from a content and programming perspective to spend as much time on the ground as possible, whether they work in that city or not. So I'm with you. It's important to really have the heartbeat of, what's important on the ground to bleed through our network. So let's talk about that Barb news that you alluded to earlier, where the measurement company in the UK, Barb, has said that they're going to include fit for TV content, which I guess means content that looks like it could be on TV from streaming platforms in its viewership. So how you described it was they're changing their definition of television, right, to sort of further include streaming. Does that help you? Does it sort of make your content more legitimate to some people in the UK?
Yeah, I think so. Look, our opinion is yes. We've actually been pretty fully engaged in this as part of the consultation process across the future landscape. So we do feel that way. I would say that TV-like content, using quotes, or fit for TV-like content is a very important distinction out there. And it's defined by three things such as editorial oversight, regulatory compliance, and brand safety, right? So this effectively has rubber stamped the message that Vevo has been taking to the market for the last few years. As it relates to Vevo overall, but specifically for connected TV, we're currently the only publisher in the UK that has broadcast equivalent scale and the editorial quality of content to deliver either a mass reach or a targeted TV screen solution. So sometimes I have to pinch myself when I say that, because it's a bold statement, but when you do look at the numbers and the scale and the viewership, it's true. So that's this kind of the message that we've stuck by. And we need there to be there for the viewer. And ultimately, Barb recognizes that the landscape is changing now, which is great news. So there's a need for advertisers and buyers to have guarantees around the quality of content being bought. It wasn't necessarily a vehicle for that prior to this news. And if we have standards around the content that uphold the quality expected of TV and can measure it, no matter where it's naturally being viewed, ultimately, it doesn't really matter how it got in that screen. And that was the crux of why it's important to us.
I do think as well, if this easily takes, or hopefully easily takes off as a measurement, that we might see more of it perhaps take place in the US. People could become inspired by this, and across not just the US, but across all other regions, because that's like the bane of my life as someone who covers this stuff, is how there is no equivalency at least in the US, between a streaming service and a TV network, right? I know eventually Nielsen One may solve that, but for now, you've got streaming platforms that measure themselves in monthly average users, TV networks that measure themselves in how many people watched in the last day. Very different numbers, and I'm excited about seeing some sort of parity, and I think it may help. It may help with the growth too, because it makes it easier for advertisers to see, right? Like you're speaking the same 100%. Language.
Yeah, no doubt. All that's true. I think there is a need for all of the above. There's a need for regulation, frankly. I don't work for the government, so I can't speak on that. But I do think that regardless of measurement capabilities, I just think getting to a point where the data that can and can't get passed back in a uniform way from platforms and publishers would be the next really important place to start. It makes it really difficult for not just publishers who distribute to different platforms, but for the advertisers who invest in content adjacency, as they've always done, through networks who have direct ad sales teams. It gets really hard to uniformly measure. I think you always gain transparency because you know where your ads are running when you do buy through networks versus the platforms these days. And that's a good place to start, but it's not the silver bullet. And so I think this is hopefully the first step towards getting to what I'm describing now. And I frankly don't think you could get there without these steps. So it's a breath of fresh air for all those reasons. And just enjoy, no matter how hard it is, enjoy seeing the space progress, because we've been so involved in it now for over 4 years. And it looked nothing then like it does now. And I'm sure 4 years from now, we'll be having the same discussion, and we'll talk about all the progress that has happened.
Yeah, it's completely unrecognizable from the landscape of 2019. That is very for sure.
Yeah.
Final question for you. Let's go into prediction mode. How do you see FAST looking in the next 3 years in Europe?
Well, look, I think that that there will be progress. If I'm using that 2-year barometer that I mentioned earlier, just what we've seen progress around the world and where we see the state in Europe, I think that there will definitely be progress. We should look for more exclusive content to air on channels, and therefore a share of more attention will occur as a result. I think, don't forget things like ITVX in the UK, for example, is fast, and the broadcasters in general are all headed to IP delivered TV, which is, again, imagine saying that a few years back, that would have been hard to believe. So I think there'll be a merging of worlds eventually. So we're back once again to calling it all TV. It's just will be redefined and accepted as such. So generally, that's that's how I see it. I think the rules of content distribution and hosting will be smoothed out, as I mentioned, types of data that can get passed back while still being cognizant of things like privacy and, of course, GDPR. So a lot of that is yet to develop, but I think the traditional broadcasters, BVOD operators will need to adapt and continue to figure ways to get their content distributed into platforms that have been found by younger demographics. And that's the only way to know how to consume not just content outside of their phone, but literally consume television.
That's been a very interesting trend. I've been researching the Australian market for, not for fun. I'm doing a trip there. Just like, oh yeah, what does he do when he's oh yeah, just cut up the Australian market.
Just hang out in Australia. That's cool.
But it's really interesting because BVOD in particular, other than Samsung, most of the fast services in Australia are BVOD, which you just don't really find. It's compared to the US is wild because it took the broadcasters a long time to embrace it, and the broadcasters there have been the ones that have really looked at the potential of it. And there's a lot of single series channels there, so I think we may end up seeing some sort of like case studies emerging from different areas, because this is the good thing right now. They're like independent petri dishes almost of different experiments, and there'll be best practices not just coming from the mature market, but people learning from different regions of the world with what they're up to in fast. So very exciting to kind of imagine what could happen.
Agree. That's very true. We see the same things in Australia. I feel like every country definitely is at its own stage, and that's totally accurate with Australia. We do work closely with Samsung TV Plus there, and in Australia we see a much different sized EPG there than we do in other countries. And I just think there's less content available there right now for that form of distribution than there are in other countries. But like we're seeing, and we've talked about, that will likely change at its own pace.
Yeah, I'd say Australia's EPG now is probably similar to like about 4 years ago for Samsung, to be honest. But
yeah, no, that's exactly right. And we thankfully they're great partners of ours, and we thankfully perform really well there. I think the content plays well, we program well, but it's also less fragmented. Honestly, there's just less choice as of today, so that's just a reality.
So it's an easier market to get a share in because you're not fighting for so many platforms.
As of now, yeah.
Watch over. I'm sure it will change in the next 2 or 3 years. Everyone will be like, wait a second, what? No, we need to have our own stuff out there. Well, thank you very much. It's been a very good conversation about just generally what Vevo does in fast, and I think very enlightening for Europe, because it's not something that we often hear a lot about, like the state of Europe and fast in Europe. So thank you very much for your time, Rob.
Thank you. I enjoy learning from each other. We really always enjoy your pieces and your coverage, and appreciate what you do on behalf of Fast. Honestly, I feel like it's been really good for us to share a lot of your work to our clients. So thank you. I look forward to future discussions and partnerships.
Thank you very much. Well, what a wonderful way to end. Compliments. Thank you, Rob.